When it comes to technology, the U.S. military is its own worst enemy. Nothing has changed the face of modern war so much as technological innovation, military and otherwise. Um, Martin Van Creveld, a brilliant Israeli historian, tells us that technology affects warfare like waves of a stone that's thrown into a pond. The disturbance is strongest at the point of impact, but the further the ripples spread apart, the weaker and less noticeable they become. And the further they go, the more likely they are to lose their identity by becoming intermixed with ripples thrown up by other stones. Now, the most revolutionary technologies to affect warfare emerged between the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 and the end of World War II in 1945. But according to a leading military historians, the rifled musket of the 1830s spelled the beginning of the end for tight tactical formations, such as the Roman wedge and the Napoleonic column, as well as the brightly colored uniforms that had defined the Western warfare since the rise of the nation states. Dating back to the 1860s, the repeating rifle made the bayonet charges obsolete, but American Civil War generals failed to recognize this fact, and the result was a catastrophic losses in combat. Now the widespread use of explosive artillery shells in 1850 ensured the demise of the two ancient and venerable military institutions, the Masonry Fort and the Wooden Hold sailing ship. Yet, it would take more than 20 years and several other non-military technological innovations before the modern steel-hulled navies could emerge. Now, these were all products of England's Industrial Revolution, the steam engine, the screw propeller, and a large-scale steel production. Two other innovations of the Industrial Revolution vastly expanded both the scale and the scope of warfare. The railroad and the telegraph permitted commanders to move like vast quantities of troops and materials to the battlefield, and to keep track of widely dispersed regiments and divisions for the first time. At Gettysburg, the generals Meade and Lee presided over some 200,000 fighting men. At the Somme on the Western Front in 1916, more than 3 million soldiers squared off against one another, and a million people became casualties of that battle over 140 days, and the outcome was a draw. Now, according to a fascinating new history of weapons technology, Firepower by Paul D. Lockhart in the half century between the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 and 1871 and the end of World War I in 1918, the weapons technology advanced further and faster than it ever had before. It was a period of profound, rapid, even violent change in the killing potential of weaponry made possible by the confluence of brilliant engineers. A great leap forward in the disciplines of chemistry and physics, and perhaps most importantly, an arms race propelled by governments aggressively, seeking out every possible advantage that they could steal on their enemies, on neighbors and rebels. And by the end of the war, to end all of the wars, these transformative new weapons had emerged, like the tank, the warplane, and the torpedo-bearing submarine. Senior strategists and commanders now had to deal with campaigns on land, sea, and air simultaneously, but the military capabilities of the tank and the airplane were not at all clear by the time the guns fell silent in 1918. Now, General Heinz Guderian of the Wehrmacht in World War II was the driving force behind the emergence of the combined arms mobile warfare. By integrating the Panzer tank divisions with motorized infantry and concentrated air cover. It was called Blitzkrieg. The Germans were able to run roughshod over most of the armies in Western Europe in a mere 9 months. Now, the campaign against its powerful adversary, France, took only 6 weeks, despite the presence in France of almost 400,000 British soldiers. In the Allies' struggle to defeat the Axis powers, the United States rapidly emerged as the arsenal of democracy. They produced more ships, planes, and tanks than any other Allied nation by far, and the war was brought to an end through the use of atomic weapons, which possessed unmanageable destructive potential. Now, the United States had spent billions of dollars to develop the bomb, and it wasn't long after the war that an international consensus emerged atomic weapons must not be used again, for the simple reason that an atomic exchange could rather quickly bring an end to all of history. Um, now, when it came now as the Cold War began creeping up, the Cold War began to take shape in the mid 1940s. Now, the U.S. military was universally recognized as the most powerful and technologically sophisticated force in the world by far. Now, this still remains true up to this day. Even granting China's remarkable military rise, the Pentagon spends billions of dollars each year on technological research and development to defeat adversaries while suffering a few friendly casualties as possible. The U.S. military establishment and the policymakers who have presided over it since the beginning of the Cold War have exhibited a strong and abiding inclination to seek technological solutions to new challenges of the battlefield, rather than through tactical or strategic innovations while existing technology, or through in-depth study of the culture and the way of war of its potential adversaries. Ironically, Washington's penchant for seeking technological solutions to military problems goes way beyond explaining why the United States has such a lousy track record in fighting the wars since the Syrian catastrophe of Vietnam. Other failures that we've had are back in Lebanon in 1983 and Somalia in 1993, and the Afghanistan and Iraq stemmed largely from ignorance on the part of both policymakers and generals of our adversaries' political dynamics, cultures, and the way of fighting. In the civil wars, insurgencies, and anarchic failing, the failing nation states raw firepower and a technologically driven approach to warfare have often proved to be more of a problem than a solution. And because of this, such wars are primarily about gaining and maintaining control of a local population, but not destroying the armed forces of the adversary. Now, what distinguishes these things and that complex from conventional fighting between national armies that wisely observes Professor Carnes Lord of the U.S. Naval War College. It is not the scale of violence as such, but the fact that the violence is embedded in a political context that directly shapes it and they constrain it. Low intensity warfare is distinguished from other warfare by the extent to which politics dictates not merely strategy, but military operations and even tactics. Now the senior U.S. The senior U.S. political and military officials have entered these conflicts, and they're convinced that the superior technology and firepower will win it all out, but it hasn't. Indeed, candid, realistic thinking about the nature of these conflicts, which are both before the commitment of forces and then during the actual fighting, has been a scarce commodity, and it all leads to this. It also lends credence to historian Max Boot's contention in A War Made New that technology alone rarely confers an insurmountable military edge. Now, even if a country figures out how to harness military power, it still needs the wisdom to know the capabilities and limitations of a war machine. Now, the story of American military deployment to foreign shores since Vietnam, more often than not, is largely a history of wishful thinking, in which the extraordinary capabilities of our technology have blinded overconfident presidents, national security advisors, and generals to the limitations of military force in affecting political change in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Now, in short, for the last half century, the United States' extraordinary military power has been badly squandered fighting the wrong wars in the wrong place at the wrong fucking time. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King, and also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And also, if you want to support my work even further, you can go to the About section on my page on my YouTube channel, and I have a link to Patreon where you can donate further. And thanks for listening. So.